Chapter 1. Breaking News, Broken Hearts. Mia Ford had one cardinal rule. Nobody gets in my way. It was a rule that served her well in her 7-year tenure at the Vanguard. Whether she was sweet-talking a source over coffee, threatening a corporate executive with a not-so-subtle reminder of journalistic ethics, or writing a takedown exposé that left readers slack-jawed, she followed that rule religiously. She was relentless, calculating, and, in her editor's words, a caffeine-fueled tornado. Mia loved that description. She even had it framed on her desk, though only to remind herself that in her line of work, compliments were a rare commodity. So when the tip about Halcyon Energy slid into her inbox, anonymous, juicy, and explosive, she knew her tornado was about to level an entire city. The email hinted at a scandal involving Halcyon's top executives, environmental cover-ups, and government kickbacks. Big players, big stakes. If she could break the story, it would be career-defining. The only problem? Ethan Cole. I swear, Mia muttered, glancing up from her laptop in the packed media room. The press conference hadn't even started, and he was already working the room like a politician on election day. Ethan's tall frame leaned casually against the coffee bar, his custom-tailored navy suit sharp enough to slice through egos. He grinned as he chatted up another reporter, his blue eyes crinkling in that annoyingly perfect way that made him look boyishly charming. She hated him for it. He wasn't just another journalist. No, Ethan Cole was the Gazette's golden boy, a relentless muckraker with a knack for breaking big stories and stealing thunder. Her thunder? Why is he here? Mia whispered to her colleague, Kara, who was scrolling on her phone beside her. Who, Ethan? Kara smirked, not looking up. Oh, you know why. Probably sniffed out the same story. He's like a bloodhound. Or, wait, more like a cockroach. Yeah, definitely a cockroach. Impossible to kill and always where you don't want him. Mia allowed herself a grin. Accurate? Before Kara could respond, Ethan's gaze swept the room and landed squarely on Mia. He gave her a slow, infuriatingly cocky smile and raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. Oh no, Kara groaned. He's coming over. Let him, Mia said through gritted teeth. Ethan weaved through the crowd, his expression as smug as ever. Ford, he greeted, his voice dripping with false sweetness. You're looking intense. Working, she replied without looking up. Something you should try sometime. He chuckled, unbothered. Oh, I'm working all right. I just like to multitask. You know, scoop stories, charm the competition, drink mediocre coffee, the usual. Mia finally met his gaze, her hazel eyes narrowing. You forgot annoy the hell out of people. Ah, but that's not work. That's a hobby. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. So, what's the angle, Ford? You wouldn't be here unless something big was cooking. Halcyon's quarterly earnings? Another failed renewable project? Or is this just a slow news day for the Vanguard? Oh, please, Mia scoffed, crossing her arms. You don't care about my angle. You're just fishing because you don't have one. Fishing? Ethan's grin widened. If I'm fishing, then you're the one wriggling on the hook. You wish, she shot back. But thanks for confirming you're here to steal my story. It's nice to know you're consistent. Steal, he gasped theatrically. Mia, I'm offended. I thought we were friends. Friends? She laughed, shaking her head. Cole, the only thing we've ever shared is a mutual disdain for each other. That's not true, he said, feigning thoughtfulness. We've also shared parking spots, press passes, and, if memory serves, an entire tray of shrimp cocktails at last year's gala. You're welcome for that, by the way. Oh, how generous. She deadpanned. Ethan glanced at his watch, clearly enjoying himself. Well, as much as I love our little chats, I've got sources to meet and stories to break. You know, actual journalism. But don't worry, Ford, I'll be sure to leave you a crumb or two. Don't bother, Mia snapped as he turned to leave. I don't eat scraps. And don't trip on your ego on the way out. He looked back over his shoulder, his grin never faltering. Try not to miss me too much. The second he disappeared into the crowd, Mia let out a frustrated sigh. Kara stifled a laugh beside her. You two are so weird, Kara said. Weird? Mia frowned. You're like, I don't know, rival co-workers in a rom-com or something. Mia rolled her eyes. No, in a rom-com, someone eventually falls in love. I'd rather fall off a cliff. Later that evening, Mia's frustration still lingered as she pored over her notes in her cramped apartment. Halcyon Energy was her white whale, and Ethan Cole was the harpoon jammed in her side. As she clicked through an online database of corporate filings, her phone buzzed with a new email. It was from an anonymous source, the subject line simple yet electrifying. Halcyon's hidden files. Mia's heart skipped as she clicked it open. Attached was a PDF filled with incriminating details, embezzlement schemes, environmental violations. It was all here, and it was massive. But then, at the very bottom of the email, a single line chilled her to the bone. You're not the only one after this. Be careful who you trust. Mia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Ethan's smug face flashed unbidden in her mind, and she clenched her jaw. Not this time, Cole. This story is mine. As the city's skyline twinkled outside her window, Mia felt the familiar buzz of adrenaline, the thrill of the chase, the high of a hunt. Whatever it took, whoever she had to outwit, she wasn't just going to break this story. She was going to destroy anyone who stood in her way. Chapter 2. Evidence and eavesdropping. The corporate gala was everything you'd expect from a company like Halcyon Energy, lavish, over the top, and absolutely dripping with irony. Gold chandeliers reflected off giant posters touting their supposed green initiatives, while guests in designer outfits mingled over champagne, the scent of expensive perfume mingled with hypocrisy. Mia Ford, dressed as a caterer, carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres through it all, trying not to gag. She adjusted her black button-up shirt and the ridiculous bow tie around her neck as she surveyed the room. These events were a journalist's goldmine, loose lips, power plays, and secrets just waiting to tumble out. She didn't care how many shrimp puffs she had to hand out. She was here for the whispers. Across the room, her eyes locked on the man she'd been tailing all week, Gregory Stanton, Halcyon's COO. He was a middle-aged power player with a stiff smile, polished shoes, and enough corporate skeletons to make a graveyard blush. Stanton was chatting with a short, balding man who looked like he hadn't smiled in 20 years. Mia instinctively edged closer. The plan was simple. Blend in, listen, and wait for someone to spill the kind of information that would blow the lid off Halcyon's so-called green empire. But of course, nothing about her job was ever simple, especially not when Ethan Cole was involved. She heard his voice before she saw him. Well, I'm sure Halcyon's investors sleep soundly at night knowing their money's being spent on Swarovski crystal centerpieces. Mia froze. Turning her head slowly, she spotted Ethan standing not 10 feet away, holding a wine glass and wearing the kind of cocky smirk that could spark a brawl at a poker table. He was dressed in a sleek tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, and he looked like he belonged here. Of course he did. That was Ethan Cole's specialty, fitting in anywhere he didn't belong. What the hell is he doing here? She muttered under her breath. Mia ducked behind a decorative plant and glared at him. It wasn't just that Ethan had crashed the same gala she'd painstakingly schemed her way into. It was that he was so damn good at this. While she was stuck pretending to refill water glasses, he was already schmoozing with Stanton's colleagues and charming his way into conversations. Ethan was sipping his wine and laughing at something one of the guests said, when, as if sensing her murderous gaze, his eyes flicked across the room and landed on her. His smirk widened. God damn it! Mia hissed, spinning away before he could walk over. She abandoned her tray on the nearest table and beelined for the hallway leading to Halcyon's restricted offices. The offices were a stark contrast to the gala's opulence. Dimly lit and sterile, with gray carpeting and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. This was where the real action happened, where the secrets were kept. Mia's goal was simple. Find anything that tied Halcyon to the financial misconduct outlined in the anonymous tip she'd received. Bank statements, internal memos, encrypted USB drives. It didn't matter. She'd take anything she could find. She pulled on a pair of gloves and slipped into the nearest office, closing the door behind her. A quick scan of the room revealed a locked filing cabinet, a desk covered in neatly stacked papers, and bingo, a laptop sitting open on the desk. Mia dropped her bag on the chair and pulled out a flash drive. She plugged it into the laptop and began copying files, her heart pounding in the eerie silence. Impressive. Mia jumped, spinning around to see Ethan leaning casually against the doorframe. "How the hell did you get in here?" she whispered harshly, yanking out her earbuds. He held up a stolen keycard and grinned. "Turns out Halcyon's IT department isn't great at password security." "Mia, 123, if you can believe it." Mia glared at him, her pulse racing. "Are you stalking me now, Cole?" "Don't flatter yourself, Ford. You're not the only one chasing this story." He nodded toward the flash drive in her hand. "Find anything good?" "Not yet, but I will." She turned back to the laptop, trying to ignore the way his presence made her skin prickle. "And if you think you're getting any of it, you're delusional." He stepped further into the room, his footsteps eerily quiet on the carpet. "Come on, Mia. You don't have to do this alone. We could." She snorted. "Team up? With you? Not a chance." "Why not?" He leaned against the desk, annoyingly close. "We'd make a great team. You're the dogged investigator. I'm the charming face of the operation." "Oh, please." Mia rolled her eyes. "You're about as charming as a parking ticket." "Harsh," he said, though he didn't seem remotely offended. "But seriously, Ford, do you even know what you're looking for? Or are you just hoping something incriminating falls into your lap?" "I don't need your help," she snapped, returning her attention to the screen. "I'm perfectly capable of breaking this story on my own." "Of course you are." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But do you really want to risk Halcyon catching you in here? Because I don't know if you've noticed, but their security guards look like they moonlight as bouncers." Mia ignored him, focusing on the file directory. Just a few more seconds, and footsteps echoed down the hall. Both of them froze. "Shit," Ethan muttered. He grabbed Mia's arm and pulled her toward the closet at the back of the office. "Hey!" she protested, but he shoved the door open and practically dragged her inside. The closet was small, cramped, and filled with cleaning supplies. They barely had enough room to stand without bumping into each other, and Mia was acutely aware of Ethan's shoulder brushing hers as he closed the door. "Would you stop breathing so loud?" she hissed. "I'm not breathing loud," he whispered back. "Yes, you are. You sound like a bulldozer." "Do bulldozers breathe?" "Oh my God, Ethan!" The door handle rattled. They both fell silent, their bodies pressed together in the darkness. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she held her breath, listening to the footsteps move past the door and fade down the hall. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan exhaled softly. "You're welcome." "For what?" she whispered back. "Saving your ass." "I didn't need saving," he chuckled, his breath warm against her ear. "You know, Ford, for someone so smart, you really suck at gratitude. And for someone so cocky, you really suck at shutting up." The door creaked as Ethan cracked it open, peeking out to make sure the coast was clear. Then he turned back to her, his smirk as infuriating as ever. "Truce," he offered, holding out his hand. Mia glared at him, her expression unreadable. After a tense pause, she finally shook his hand. "Fine, but if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I won't," he said, his smile softening. "Your secrets are safe with me." "For now," she muttered, slipping past him and disappearing into the hallway. Ethan watched her go, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "This is going to be fun," he thought. Chapter 3, Dirty Tricks. Mia Ford was fuming. She wasn't just angry. She was the kind of furious that could power a small city. Ethan Cole had officially crossed a line. That morning, while she sat at her kitchen table, nursing her second cup of coffee and reviewing the files she'd snagged during her infiltration of Halcyon, her editor, Alice Ramirez, had called. "You better sit down for this," Alice had said. her tone laced with both dread and amusement. Why? Mia had asked, already suspicious. Because the Gazette just published a story about Halcyon's greenwashing initiatives. They called it the tip of the iceberg. Sound familiar? Mia had nearly dropped her coffee mug. Are you kidding me? That smug little... Not entirely kidding, Alice interrupted. They didn't get the full story. You've still got plenty to work with, but it's clear Cole's been sniffing around the same leads. Tighten the timeline, Ford. We need your piece out before he digs any deeper. Now, sitting in her office at the Vanguard, Mia's mind churned with possibilities. How had Ethan gotten enough information to break a story already? She had double-checked everything she'd found, and the files she'd stolen didn't even hint at the greenwashing initiatives he'd exposed. Had he hacked her? No, Ethan wasn't subtle enough for that. Had one of her sources flipped? Maybe, but doubtful. She'd vetted them all. The realization hit her like a slap. He planted it, she muttered to herself, glaring at her computer screen. Somewhere during their chaotic game of espionage, Ethan must have fed her a false lead, a breadcrumb trail that led nowhere useful while he worked the real story. It was dirty, underhanded, and exactly the kind of thing Ethan Cole would do. Mia clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. All right, Cole, she muttered. You want to play dirty? Well, let's play dirty. Across the city, Ethan was lounging in his office at the Gazette, basking in the afterglow of his latest scoop. The story had gone live that morning, and the clicks were already rolling in. His editor had practically done cartwheels when the piece landed on her desk, and Ethan, as always, had accepted the praise with his trademark grin. But as much as he loved the thrill of a good story, there was something even more satisfying about knowing it would drive Mia Ford up the wall. He could practically hear her shouting obscenities at her laptop. "Call!" a voice snapped, pulling him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see his colleague, Sophie, standing in his doorway. She raised an eyebrow, holding a sticky note between two fingers. "This just came for you," she said, tossing it onto his desk. "You've got a source meeting at noon. Some guy who claims he's got dirt on Halcyon's lobbying efforts." Ethan frowned, picking up the note. "I didn't set up a meeting." "Well, someone did. The guy called the front desk and said it was urgent. Figured it was worth passing along." Ethan's curiosity piqued. He glanced at the clock. 11:45. "Thanks, Sophie," he said, grabbing his coat. The meeting was at a dingy cafe on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the coffee tasted like burnt toast and the smell of fryer grease clung to your clothes long after you left. Ethan slid into a booth near the back, scanning the room for his supposed source. He turned and nearly groaned out loud when he saw Mia standing there, dressed in her signature black blazer and heels that somehow made her look both professional and intimidating. She slid into the seat across from him, a satisfied smirk on her face. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan said, leaning back in his seat. "You set this up." "Of course I did," she said, her tone infuriatingly casual. "Thought it was time we had a little chat." He arched an eyebrow. "You could have just called." "Oh, but this is so much more fun." Mia leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "You've been busy, haven't you? Breaking stories, planning fake leads, generally being a pain in my ass." Ethan smirked. "What can I say? I multitask." "Well, congratulations on your little scoop," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You must be so proud of yourself." "I am, actually. Thanks for noticing." Mia's smirk faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. "Too bad you didn't get the whole story. That must sting." "Oh, don't worry," Ethan said smoothly. "I've got plenty more where that came from. But if you're here to gloat, Ford, you're wasting your time. I've got another source meeting in 10 minutes. Mia laughed. A short, sharp sound. "That's adorable. You actually think you're ahead of me." "I don't think it," he said, leaning closer. "I know it." For a moment they locked eyes, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. Then, as if on cue, the waitress appeared, breaking the moment. "Can I get you two something?" she asked, looking between them. "Just coffee," Ethan said. "Black," Mia added. The waitress nodded and walked away, leaving them alone again. "You know," Ethan said, his voice low, "this little rivalry of ours is starting to feel less like work and more like a hobby. Should we be worried?" Mia rolled her eyes. Trust me, Cole, the only hobby I have is plotting your downfall. Ah, he said, nodding sagely. So I'm living rent-free in your head. Good to know. More like squatting, she shot back. And don't get too comfortable because I'm about to evict you. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. God, you're exhausting. And you're insufferable, she countered. Their coffees arrived, and for a moment they drank in silence, the weight of their unspoken competition hanging between them. Then Ethan set his mug down and leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Look, he said, his tone softer. You're good at this, Ford. I'll give you that. But you don't have to make it personal. Mia raised an eyebrow. Oh, it's personal now? Did planting fake leads not count as personal? Hey, he said, holding up his hands. You would have done the same thing. She tilted her head, conceding the point. Maybe, but I wouldn't have been so sloppy about it. Ethan laughed, and for a split second, Mia felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. Truce? He offered, holding out his hand. She stared at him for a long moment before shaking her head. Not a chance, Ethan sighed dramatically. You're impossible, Ford. And you love it, she said, standing and tossing a few bills onto the table. As she walked away, Ethan watched her go, a slow smile spreading across his face. She's good, he thought, but I'm better. Chapter 4, Lines Crossed. Mia stood at the edge of the rooftop parking lot, her arms crossed and her eyes glued to the twinkling skyline of the city. The cold wind tugged at her hair, but she barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, running through everything she'd uncovered about Halcyon Energy, and everything she hadn't. Despite her best efforts, the pieces weren't coming together. The files she'd copied were damning but incomplete. Halcyon's financial reports showed massive discrepancies. Money disappearing into shadowy subsidiaries, contracts written off without explanation. But the missing pieces were still frustratingly out of reach. She hated loose ends. They made her restless, and they left just enough room for people like Ethan Cole to swoop in and make a mess of everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Ford, she answered briskly, her tone sharp. Mia, came the familiar voice of Alice, her editor. Tell me you've got something solid. The board's breathing down my neck about this Halcyon story, and I'd really love to give them a reason to stop treating me like a human stress ball. I'm close, Mia replied, pacing now. There's definitely financial misconduct, embezzlement, maybe even tax evasion, but I need more time to lock it down. Alice sighed. How much time? Give me a week, Mia said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. You've got 3 days, Alice countered. We need this story on the front page before the Gazette pulls another fast one. Don't let Cole beat you to the punch again. Mia's jaw tightened. He won't. Good. Call me when you have something. Alice hung up, and Mia let out a frustrated groan. She turned back toward her car, only to freeze when she spotted a familiar figure leaning casually against the driver's side door. You've got to be kidding me, she muttered. Ford, Ethan called out, his voice echoing across the rooftop. Fancy seeing you here. What do you want, Cole? She snapped, marching toward him. Relax, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. I'm not here to steal your car, although, he added with a smirk, I wouldn't mind upgrading. This thing looks like it's on life support. Mia ignored the jab and stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms. How did you even find me? Ethan tapped his temple. Reporter instincts. Also, I saw your car pull in. Seriously, Ford, you've got to stop going to the same spots I do. People are going to start thinking we're, friends. Over my dead body, she shot back. Now, unless you have a reason to be here, get out of my way. Oh, I have a reason, he said, his tone shifting slightly. I thought you'd want to know that Halcyon's lawyers are sniffing around. Word on the street is they're looking to slap lawsuits on anyone poking too hard. Mia's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? I have my sources, he said, his grin widening. You mean your informants, she countered. People you probably bribed with whiskey and cheap flattery. Hey, it's not cheap if it works, Ethan said. Then his expression turned serious. Look, Ford, I'm not joking. Halcyon's playing dirty. They've got connections in high places and they're not afraid to use them. And why would you warn me about that? She asked, her tone skeptical. He shrugged. Call it professional courtesy? Or maybe I just don't want them to take you out of the game before I have a chance to beat you. Charming as ever, she muttered. Ethan's smirk faded, and for a brief moment, Mia thought she saw something genuine in his expression. Concern? No, not possible. You should be careful, he said, his voice softer. Halcyon isn't just another crooked corporation. They're dangerous. Mia stared at him, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. But before she could respond, his phone buzzed. Ethan glanced at the screen, sighed, and pushed off her car. Well, as much as I'd love to stay and chat, I've got places to be. He started to walk away, but paused and looked back at her. Ooh, and Ford, try not to get yourself killed. It'd be a real shame to lose my favorite sparring partner. Mia watched him disappear down the stairwell, her thoughts racing. The next morning, Mia's mood hadn't improved. If anything, it had gotten worse. Ethan's warning gnawed at her, and though she hated to admit it, he wasn't wrong. Halcyon was dangerous. She'd been digging into their political connections for weeks, and what she'd found was a tangled web of bribes, lobbying efforts, and backroom deals. Senators, CEOs, even a few judges. They all had ties to Halcyon, and none of those ties looked clean. The question was, how far was Halcyon willing to go to protect their secrets? Mia was sitting in her office poring over spreadsheets and emails when Kara poked her head in. You've got a visitor? Kara said, her expression uneasy. Mia looked up, frowning. Who is it? Some guy in a suit. Says he's from Halcyon's legal team. Mia's stomach dropped, but she quickly masked her unease. Tell him I'm busy. I did. He said he'll wait. Mia sighed and stood, smoothing out her blazer. Fine. Let's get this over with. She stepped into the lobby, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an expensive suit was waiting for her, his expression unreadable. Miss Ford, he said, extending a hand. I'm Charles Harrington, Halcyon's chief legal counsel. Mia ignored his hand. To what do I owe the pleasure? Harrington smiled thinly. I'll get straight to the point. We're aware of your interest in Halcyon and would strongly advise you to reconsider pursuing this story. For your own sake. Is that a threat? Mia asked, her tone icy. Not at all, Harrington said smoothly. Just a friendly suggestion. Mia crossed her arms, refusing to be intimidated. Well, here's my friendly suggestion. Tell your bosses I'm not scared of them. Harrington's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe even respect. Very well, he said, adjusting his tie. But don't say we didn't warn you. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Mia standing in the lobby, her heart pounding. That night, Mia sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop. The weight of the day hung heavy on her shoulders, but she refused to let it slow her down. Halcyon's legal team could try to scare her all they wanted. It wouldn't stop her. So her phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen, a text from Ethan. Cole, still alive? Mia rolled her eyes, but couldn't stop a small smile from tugging at her lips. Mia, disappointed? The response came almost immediately. Cole, a little, but mostly impressed. Don't let the sharks get you, Ford. She stared at the message for a moment before typing back. Mia, I won't if you don't. She hit send and tossed her phone onto the table, her resolve hardening. Ethan was right about one thing. Halcyon was dangerous. But Mia wasn't backing down. She never did. Chapter 5, The Tip-Off. Mia had spent the better part of the last 2 days running on caffeine and spite. The clock was ticking, and her editor was breathing down her neck to get the Halcyon story wrapped. Yet, despite hours of digging through stolen files, connecting dots, and bribing sources with promises of anonymity, she still didn't have the bombshell she needed. Halcyon's crimes were like puzzle pieces scattered across a windy field. Close enough to tease the picture, but maddeningly out of reach. Every time she thought she'd locked onto something concrete, it unraveled, leaving her back at square one. What made it worse was that she knew Ethan was closing in. He hadn't published anything since his initial expose, which meant he was holding on to something bigger, biding his time until the moment he could drop the hammer. And Mia? She wasn't about to let him. So when her phone buzzed that evening with a text from one of her oldest informants, her pulse quickened. Unknown number. Meet me at Pier 42, 10 p.m. I have what you're looking for. She knew the number. It belonged to a former Halcyon employee who'd gone off the grid months ago. If he was reaching out now, it could only mean one thing: the missing piece she needed to take Halcyon down. And yet, the timing was suspicious. Why now? Why tonight? Mia's gut churned as she stared at the message. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but she didn't have the luxury of caution. Not when she was this close. Pier 42 was the kind of place where bad things happened after dark. The smell of salt water mixed with diesel fumes, and the air buzzed faintly with the sound of distant machinery. Shadows stretched long across the docks, broken only by the occasional flicker of a dim streetlight. Mia parked her car at the edge of the lot and stepped out, tucking her phone into her pocket. She wore her usual stakeout uniform, dark jeans, a black hoodie, and sneakers designed for a quick getaway. She couldn't risk being recognized, especially not here. Her informant had instructed her to meet him at Warehouse 7, a decrepit building at the far end of the pier. The windows were boarded up and the rusted door hung slightly ajar, creaking faintly in the wind. As she stepped inside, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Don't trust anyone. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She glanced around the dimly lit space, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. The warehouse was empty, except for a few wooden crates scattered along the floor. The air smelled damp and metallic, and the sound of her footsteps echoed eerily. "Hello?" she called, her voice steady despite the unease crawling up her spine. No response. She took another step forward, her eyes scanning every corner of the room, her fingers tightened around the phone in her pocket, and then she saw it. A USB drive, sitting on the edge of one of the crates. Mia approached cautiously, her heart pounding. The USB was labeled in bold black marker, Halcyon Proof. She reached for it, her fingers brushing the cold plastic. Ford. The voice stopped her cold. Mia whirled around to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the faint glow of the streetlight outside. "What the hell are you doing here?" she demanded, clutching the USB in her hand. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, stepping inside. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes flicked toward the USB. "Let me guess, anonymous tip?" Her jaw tightened. "How do you know that?" "Because I got the same one," he said, holding up his phone. Mia's stomach dropped. "Let me see that," she said, marching toward him and snatching his phone. Sure enough, the message was identical to hers. Same number, same words. Ethan crossed his arms, watching her carefully. "Don't you think it's a little coincidental that we were both invited here at the same time?" Mia bristled. "What are you saying, that this is a setup?" "I'm saying it's suspicious," he replied, his voice calm. "Halcyon's legal team just came after you. They know you're a threat. Don't you think they'd try to bait you into a trap?" Mia frowned, glancing down at the USB in her hand. "Could it be fake? Or worse, could it be rigged? Even if it is a setup," she said, shoving the USB into her pocket. "It's too late to walk away now. If this has what I think it does, it's game over for Halcyon." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're stubborn as hell, you know that? And you're a pain in my ass," she shot back. He smirked. "Glad we're on the same page." Before either of them could say more, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from outside. Ethan's eyes snapped to hers. "Did you tell anyone you were coming here?" "No," she whispered, her heart racing. "Stay behind me," he said, moving toward the door. Mia grabbed his arm. "I don't need your protection. And I don't need a lecture right now," he hissed. The footsteps grew louder and a shadow passed across the broken window. Mia's breath hitched as she scanned the room for an escape route. There, a ladder leading to the rafters above. She grabbed Ethan's sleeve and pointed. "Up there." Without waiting for a response, she sprinted toward the ladder, climbing as quickly and quietly as she could. Ethan followed close behind, muttering something about how this was a terrible idea. They reached the rafters just as the warehouse door creaked open. Mia flattened herself against the beam, her breath shallow. Below, two men in dark suits entered the warehouse, their movements deliberate and their expressions cold. "Search the place," one of them said, his voice clipped. Mia's pulse thundered in her ears as the men began methodically checking the crates. Ethan was pressed against the beam beside her, his arm brushing hers. "This is why I hate anonymous tips," he whispered so softly she almost didn't hear him. Mia shot him a glare, but didn't respond. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the men searched the warehouse. Finally, one of them held up a phone. "They've been here," he said, showing the screen to his partner. "Let's move," the other man replied. "They can't have gotten far." The men left as quickly as they'd arrived, the sound of their footsteps fading into the distance. Mia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Well," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "that was fun." "Shut up," she muttered, climbing down the ladder. Ethan followed her, brushing dust off his sleeves. "So, what's the plan now? Run back to your editor and hand over the mysterious USB?" "I don't need your advice, Cole," she snapped, shoving the USB into her bag. "I've got this under control." "Sure you do," he said, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Just be careful, Ford. Whoever set this up isn't playing around." Mia hesitated, the tension between them palpable. Then she nodded once and turned to leave. As she stepped into the night, Ethan watched her go, a strange mix of admiration and worry tightening in his chest. Chapter 6. In Too Deep. Mia's apartment was dark, save for the faint glow of her laptop screen. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by empty coffee cups, takeout containers, and piles of printed documents. The USB drive she'd snagged from the warehouse was plugged into her laptop, and its contents blinked back at her like a treasure chest of secrets. It wasn't just damning, it was catastrophic. The files were a Pandora's box of corruption, secret offshore accounts, internal memos explicitly discussing environmental fraud, payments to lobbyists, and a detailed list of every government official Halcyon had paid off to suppress legislation. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the documents, each revelation hitting harder than the last. This wasn't just a corporate scandal, this was systemic corruption at the highest levels. Mia leaned back against the couch, closing her eyes for a moment to let the gravity of it all sink in. She'd chased big stories before, but this was different. If she published this, it would destroy Halcyon and ripple through government institutions like an earthquake. Careers would end, reputations would be obliterated, and people could get hurt. She opened her eyes, her gaze landing on her phone sitting on the coffee table. Ethan's warning from the warehouse echoed in her mind. Halcyon isn't just another crooked corporation. They're dangerous. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was a text from Ethan. "Cole, please tell me you're not stupid enough to open that USB without precautions." Mia rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smirking. Of course, he'd assumed she was reckless. "Don't worry, I'm fine. Go bother someone else." The response came almost immediately. "Cole. Seriously, Ford, if there's anything incriminating on that drive, Halcyon will come for you. They're not going to play nice." Mia stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Mia, I can handle myself." But could she? The next morning, Mia sat in her editor's office, the USB drive clutched tightly in her hand. Alice Ramirez leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed as she stared at Mia with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "So," Alice said, gesturing to the USB, "what am I looking at?" Mia took a deep breath. "Everything. Financial fraud, political corruption, environmental cover-ups, it's all there. Enough to take down Halcyon and a lot of their friends." Alice raised an eyebrow. "And you're sure this is legit?" "I've cross-referenced the files with other sources," Mia said. "It's legit." Alice leaned forward, her expression serious. "Then you know what happens next, right?" Mia nodded. "We verify everything, write the story, and publish." "No," Alice said sharply. What happens next is Halcyon comes after us with everything they've got. Legal teams, PR firms, maybe even something worse. They'll come after you, Ford. Are you ready for that? I'm not scared of them, Mia said, though her voice was steadier than her nerves. Alice studied her for a long moment before nodding. All right, but we need to be smart about this. No leaks, no mistakes. And Ford? Yeah? Watch your back. Across town, Ethan Cole sat in his office at the Gazette, staring at his own computer screen with a furrowed brow. He'd spent the better part of the morning trying to track down the origins of the USB drive Mia had snagged, and what he'd found didn't sit right with him. The phone number tied to the anonymous tip was untraceable, likely a burner, but the message had originated from somewhere close, too close. Whoever had sent it had access to insider information about Halcyon and knew exactly how to bait both him and Mia into that warehouse. It didn't add up. And the more he thought about it, the more worried he became. His phone buzzed. Sophie, we need to talk. Meet me at the diner. Ethan frowned. Sophie never called meetings unless something was urgent. The diner was a greasy little joint on the edge of the city, the kind of place where the coffee was terrible and the waffles were life-changing. Ethan slid into the booth across from Sophie, who was nervously stirring her cup of coffee. What's up? Ethan asked, cutting straight to the point. Sophie glanced around, lowering her voice. I don't know what you're working on with Halcyon, but you need to be careful. Careful how? They're watching you, she said. I have a friend in IT who works for a private security firm. He told me Halcyon's been running surveillance on journalists, tracking emails, phones, everything. Ethan's stomach tightened. How do you know this? Because they're not just watching you, Sophie said, her voice dropping even lower. They're watching Ford, too. Ethan's pulse quickened. Mia, Sophie nodded. Whatever she's digging into, it's put her in their crosshairs. And if Halcyon thinks she's a threat... Ethan didn't wait for her to finish. He stood abruptly, pulling out his wallet and tossing a 20 on the table. Ethan, Sophie called after him. What are you going to do? Something stupid, he muttered, heading for the door. Mia was in the middle of organizing her notes when her phone buzzed. Cole, open your door now. She frowned, walking to the door of her apartment. When she opened it, Ethan was standing there, slightly out of breath and looking more serious than she'd ever seen him. What the hell, Cole? She asked. We need to talk, he said, brushing past her into the apartment. Excuse me. This isn't a joke, Ford, he said, turning to face her. You're in danger. Mia folded her arms, narrowing her eyes. What are you talking about? Halcyon, Ethan said. They're watching you, your phone, your emails, everything. You're not just chasing a story anymore. You're a target. Mia's jaw tightened. And how exactly do you know this? Because they're watching me too, he admitted. She stared at him, her mind racing. Could he be telling the truth? Or was this just another one of his games? I don't need your help, Cole, she said finally. Yes, you do, he countered, his voice firm. This isn't just about the story anymore. It's about staying alive long enough to tell it. For once, there was no smirk, no teasing glint in his eyes. He was dead serious. And for the first time, Mia felt the faint stirrings of fear. Chapter 7, The Scoop. Mia paced her apartment like a caged animal. The USB drive clutched tightly in her hand. Ethan sat on her couch, looking unusually subdued. Gone was the smug grin she had grown to loathe and, if she was being honest, slightly admire. Instead, his expression was tight with worry, his eyes tracking her movements as if he expected her to combust at any moment. You can't publish this yet, Ethan said for the third time. I don't recall asking for your opinion. Mia shot back, spinning around to glare at him. I'm not giving you an opinion, he said evenly. I'm stating a fact. If you publish that without airtight verification, Halcyon's lawyers will eat you alive. And if they don't, whoever sent that USB... I can handle a few lawyers, she said, though her voice lacked the conviction it usually carried. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Mia, this isn't a joke. This isn't some puff piece about a cheating politician or a corrupt CEO. This is bigger. You're poking a bear that won't just swipe at you. It'll maul you. She stopped pacing, her shoulders tense. What do you want me to do, Ethan? Sit on this? Wait for them to cover their tracks and bury the truth? No, he said. I want you to be smart about it. Let me help you, she scoffed. Help me? The last time I let you anywhere near my story, you hijacked it and published first. That was different. Was it? Ethan stood, his frustration finally breaking through. Yes, it was. That story was a competition. This is survival. You think I don't want to break this as much as you do? I do. But if we don't play this right, no one's going to hear it. And then what's the point? Mia opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. He was right, damn it. As much as she hated to admit it, Ethan was right. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Fine, she said reluctantly. What do you suggest? Ethan relaxed slightly, though his posture remained alert. First, we verify everything on that USB. Cross-relation it with public records, independent sources, anything we can find. If there's even one piece of misinformation in there, it'll sink the whole story. And then? Then, he said, a spark of determination in his eyes, we publish it together. Mia blinked. Together? It's the only way this works, Ethan said. 2 outlets, 2 reporters. They can't accuse us of bias or spin if we're both backing it, and it doubles our reach. Halcyon won't be able to suppress it. Mia stared at him, her mind racing. The idea of teaming up with Ethan Cole made her stomach churn, but he wasn't wrong. Publishing together would make the story virtually untouchable. It would also mean sharing credit, which she hated almost as much as she hated Ethan. Still, the stakes were too high for pride. Fine, she said at last. But if you screw me over, I swear to God, I won't, he said, holding up his hands. Truce? Mia hesitated before shaking his hand. Truce. The next 3 days were a blur of late nights, bad takeout, and endless research. Mia and Ethan worked side by side in her apartment, combing through the files on the USB and matching them against every source they could find. There were moments of tension, Mia snapping at Ethan for hogging the coffee pot, Ethan rolling his eyes at her obsessive need to triple-check every detail. But there were also moments of surprising camaraderie. I still can't believe this memo exists, Ethan said one evening, holding up a printout of an email exchange between 2 Halcyon executives. Let's make sure the senator gets his bonus before the vote. Subtle. Mia smirked. Corporate criminals aren't known for their creativity. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You know, Ford, you're not half as insufferable as I thought you were. Gee, thanks, she said dryly. You're still entirely insufferable. Fair. By the end of the 3rd day, they had everything they needed. The story was airtight, backed by dozens of sources, and corroborated by financial records, leaked emails, and whistleblower testimonies. It was, in a word, unshakable. The 2 of them sat at Mia's kitchen table, staring at the draft on her laptop. This is it, Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. Mia nodded, her stomach twisting with both excitement and nerves. Yeah, this is it. They were quiet for a moment, the weight of what they were about to do settling over them. You ready? Ethan asked. Mia took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. Ethan reached across the table and hit the submit button, sending the story to their respective editors. There was no going back now. The next 24 hours were chaos. The story exploded as soon as it went live, dominating headlines and trending on every social media platform. Halcyon's name was everywhere, and the public backlash was immediate and unforgiving. By noon, protests had erupted outside Halcyon's headquarters. By evening, several of their top executives had resigned. And by midnight, the Justice Department had announced an investigation into the company's dealings. Mia and Ethan watched it all unfold from her couch, the glow of the TV reflecting off their tired faces. We did it, Ethan said softly, a note of disbelief in his voice. Mia glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. Yeah. We did. For the first time in her career, she felt something she hadn't expected. Pride, not just in the story, but in the partnership that had made it possible. Of course, that didn't mean she was about to let Ethan off the hook entirely. "You still owe me coffee for that stunt at the gala," she said, nudging him with her elbow. Ethan grinned. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" "Not a chance," he laughed, shaking his head. "Fair enough." As the night wore on and the city buzzed with the fallout of their story, Mia allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. For once, the truth had won, and for once, she didn't mind sharing the byline. Chapter 8. Full Circle. 6 months later, Mia stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, the bright lights beating down on her as applause filled the room. She was dressed in a sleek black dress, her hair pinned back, and in her hand she held the award she had never thought she'd win: the National Journalism Award for Investigative Reporting. Her name had been called first, followed immediately by Ethan Cole's. She glanced to her right, where Ethan stood, looking just as uncomfortable as she felt, though he masked it with his trademark smirk. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, and his messy hair somehow still looked effortlessly perfect. Of course it did. When the applause finally died down, Mia stepped up to the microphone. She wasn't used to speeches. She preferred letting her writing do the talking. But tonight, she didn't have a choice. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves prickling at her skin. "This award means everything to me, but I wouldn't be standing here alone tonight if it weren't for the incredible team at the Vanguard." A few cheers rose from the crowd. She smiled. "And reluctantly, I'll admit, a little help from my colleague." She glanced at Ethan, who gave her an exaggerated bow. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Working with Ethan Cole on this story was, let's say, an experience, Mia continued, earning more laughter. But together, we did something that mattered. We told the truth. We held powerful people accountable. And we proved that even in a world full of noise, journalism still has the power to make a difference. The applause came again, loud and sincere, and for the first time that night, Mia let herself relax. Ethan stepped up to the microphone next, and she braced herself for whatever snarky comment he was about to make. "First of all," Ethan said, flashing the audience, his signature grin, "I'd like to clarify that working with Mia Ford wasn't just an experience. It was like running a marathon, climbing a mountain, and surviving a shark attack, all at the same time." The audience roared with laughter, and Mia rolled her eyes, though she couldn't quite hide her smile. "But," Ethan continued, his tone softening, "I wouldn't trade it for anything. Mia is the most relentless, brilliant, and fearless journalist I've ever had the privilege of working with, even if she drives me absolutely insane. So, thank you, Ford, for making this story everything it could be, and for not killing me yet." The crowd laughed again, and this time, Mia joined them. After the ceremony, the after-party was in full swing at a ritzy hotel ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and journalists from every major outlet mingled with glasses of champagne in hand. Mia found herself at the bar, sipping her drink and watching the crowd with a mix of amusement and exhaustion. She'd been congratulated more times in the last hour than she could count, and while she appreciated the recognition, all she really wanted was to go home and sleep for a week. "You know," came a familiar voice beside her, "this is the first time I've seen you look almost relaxed. It's weird." She turned to find Ethan standing there holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to her without asking, then leaned against the bar, his expression smug as always. "Don't get used to it," Mia said, taking the glass. Ethan chuckled. "Fair enough. So, how does it feel to be officially recognized as the second best journalist in the room?" She arched an eyebrow. "Second best?" "Obviously," he said, grinning. "They put your name first because they felt bad for you. It's called pity, Ford." She smirked. "Right, and your name was second because they wanted to end on a low note." He laughed, shaking his head. "God, you're impossible." "And you're predictable," she countered. They clinked their glasses in mock toasts, the banter flowing as easily as the champagne. For a while, they just stood there, watching the crowd. The rivalry that had defined so much of their relationship felt almost distant now, like an old habit they couldn't quite shake but no longer resented. Do you ever think about what's next? Mia asked suddenly, surprising even herself with the question. Ethan glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. What do you mean? I mean, we've just taken down one of the biggest corporations in the country, she said. We've already done the thing most journalists spend their whole careers chasing. What's next? Ethan tilted his head, considering her words. You really don't know, do you? She frowned. Know what? This isn't it, he said simply. The work's not done. Halcyon was just the start. There are 100 more stories out there, 100 more corrupt CEOs and politicians and corporations just waiting to be exposed. The question isn't what's next, it's how soon can we get started? Mia blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. For once, there was no smugness, no sarcasm, just determination. And here I thought you were just in it for the glory, she said softly. Glory's nice, he admitted, flashing her a crooked smile, but it's not why I do this. And I don't think it's why you do it either. Well, she didn't respond right away, but she didn't need to. He was right, and they both knew it. As the party wound down, Ethan walked Mia to the curb where a line of taxis waited. The city buzzed softly around them, the lights of skyscrapers glowing against the dark sky. You know, Ethan said, shoving his hands into his pockets, you're not half bad when you're not threatening to destroy my career. Mia smirked, and you're not entirely insufferable when you're not stealing my stories. I'll take that as a compliment, he said. They stood there for a moment, the tension between them no longer sharp and combative, but something warmer, something unspoken. Well, Mia said, breaking the silence. See you around, Cole. Count on it, he replied. As she climbed into the taxi and the car pulled away, she glanced back at him through the window. He was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her go. And for the first time, Mia wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't mind seeing him again. 6 months ago, they had been rivals, enemies locked in a battle of wits and ambition. Now, they were something else. Not quite friends, not quite anything else either, but whatever they were, it felt like the start of something. Something big. Thank you for listening. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like these.